This is a recording for the CUPHAT project, Coastal Uplands, Heritage and Tourism. My name is Daniel Carey. Today is the 11th of July 2023 and I have with me here Tina Christiansen. Thank you, Tina. Can you confirm for the recorder that you're happy to take part in this project?
Yes, Daniel, I'm happy to take part.
Thanks. And can you spell your name for the recorder, please?
Certainly. TinaChristiansen.
Thanks a million. I thought we might start with your early memories of this place or this area. What your first or early memories of the region are?
Well, my first memory of Tinahely was we came to the Tinahely show, and that was BK, before kids, and we came with my husband's daughter, and my first memory was that it was very far away, which is what most of my friends level at me when you live in the country. It's very far away, and it wasn't until we had our first child and we started looking for a better life for the whole family that we looked at Tinahely again. That's not to say we didn't look at other places. We drove up and down the country with a small child for 18 months and found this house, and we both loved it for different reasons. I loved the feel of the house, and my husband loved the view of the land. He'd come from the city centre, but he'd always been into nature and gardening and plants, and he loved the land. We'd put in an offer, and the offer was refused. So licking our wounds, we went off on holiday, and a few months later got a call to say that the place was still available, the original offer had fallen through, and were we still interested? And knowing what estate agents were like, we said yes. This was on a Friday afternoon, but our original offer stood, and we would accept on Monday or not. It had to be accepted by Monday. So they accepted, and that was the summertime, and at Halloween that year we moved in. So it was definitely meant to be, the universe works in strange ways. So yes, we moved in Halloween with our little boy, and he turned 2 the following February, and it was transformative for us. I had lived in the country before. I'd stayed with a friend in Kildare, so I knew I could live without the sort of access of cities and all that kind of stuff. And I had only 2 criteria when we were looking for a house. One was that I would have neighbours, and the other was that I could walk to school, because I didn't want to be in a situation that I was completely isolated. And I knew how important school would be for young children, and that's exactly what we got. Having said that, we had to fight to get a footpath so we could walk to school without being run over by tractors. I'd had my second child by then, and the pram and a small child following behind me as we were going around the bend meant that I was extremely motivated to get that footpath. And the engineer at the time, I wrote him a very detailed letter about it was a green school, and how many children were going and how many children were going to be coming, and why the footpath was so important. And we discussed it with the landowner, and the engineer contacted me and said to me, I'm just phoning to tell you you'll be getting your footpath. And I said, that's amazing. I said, you've restored my faith in Wicklow County Council. And his response was, one swallow does not a summer make, which I thought was a very amusing and accurate reflection of most people's experience of Wicklow County Council. Nonetheless, it did improve things, and lots of children use that footpath now to get to school, which is the ultimate thing for communities and for any kind of improvement, your motivation is key. So that was our first experience of, being here together. My husband told me shortly after we'd moved here that he'd sat in the field looking out over Mullins Hill and wept with joy and said, all my dreams have come true. So I've held this over him that he has no more dreams left. It's all about my dreams now. But anyway, we have been very, very happy in this place, and we have some fantastic neighbours, and we hope that we have been decent neighbours as well.
There's a bunch of stuff that we might get into detail on there in a second, but I'm conscious that I suppose most of the focus will probably be on life after your arrival there. But I'm conscious there's maybe a few blanks from beforehand. Do you want to just kind of sketch out life? You mentioned life before kids. What about life before Tinnahealy?
Well, there was definitely a lot of life before Tinnahealy. I was born in South Africa. My parents are both Danish. My father had moved to South Africa as a child after the war. His father had lost his business following the war. He'd been a very successful hat maker, I believe. And he did indeed have a better life down there. My mother went to South Africa to learn English as a 17-year-old. And they met down there and got married and lived a very privileged life, as white people did in South Africa in 1964 and the 60s. But after a while, my father wasn't happy with the situation, and they both decided they would leave South Africa. We had an Irish friend there, and he was a Davern from Cashel. And he said that the IDA were desperate to develop industry in Ireland, and they were looking for people to set up businesses. So my father had some experience in anodized aluminium and signage, and he thought that this would be a great opportunity. So he packed himself off first to Ireland, and we met him then. And our initial stay was in a B&B in Cork. Now, I don't know what my mother thought of this. My memory of that was candle wax, boiled cabbage, and gas as smells. And my mother was stoic, to say the least, having come from a house with a gardener and her own staff and her own swimming pool and beautiful weather. But she was committed, and we then moved to Crumlin, where my mother alleges I learned to swear like a sailor in St. Mary's School, and we had a few years there. And stoically then she continued, and we moved to a house in Clonskea that we rented, and I'm still friends with our neighbours from that house, and I think we were 8 or something. I was 8 anyway at that time. And then we moved around the corner and grew up there. I went to school in Wesley College. I went to Sanford National first in Ranelagh, and then I went to school in Wesley College. And afterwards, I was wondering what to do, and there was a very good arts school in South Africa. And this was at the time, it was transitioning with apartheid. There was a lot of sort of frisson of that, but nothing was happening for me here. So off I went to South Africa and stayed with my grandparents originally, and then moved out. But I had a wonderful time in art college. I studied photography, and I got my diploma and came home in time for my 21st. And then I worked as a photographer for a while and enjoyed that, but I was always traveling and stuff. But it wasn't very lucrative for me at the time, because I hadn't worked as an assistant or anything like that. So I got various jobs, and I worked in Hot Press magazine for 2 years, and had a great time. and went to lots and lots of concerts and live music and stuff. It was great fun. Nobody was terribly well paid, but it was great fun, informative, and then I got into. Then I started traveling. I got a job in a car hire place in Tenerife because I spoke Danish, and it was a Danish company, and they needed somebody who spoke English and Danish. So I went there and I lived there for a year, and that was fantastic as well. And that was supposed to be just for a couple of months, and then I moved into a golf club where I learned a bit of Spanish, and then I met some French people who had a boat moored at this golf club where I was working, and they said to me that they were traveling across to the Pacific because there was a girl from Tahiti on board, and it was a French guy on the boat, young guy who'd made a lot of money on something called Minitel Rose. You can look it up. And it was the beginning of the internet really in France, and very interesting people, and they were leaving. That was a Tuesday, and they left on the Thursday, and I went with them. So we sailed down to the Cape Verde, and before it was a holiday destination with goats in the street, and I met a guy there who had learned how to ride with Iris Kellett and knew Eddie Macken, a Belgian guy. So you never know where you're going to meet people that are ties to you. And then we sailed on to Martinique, and I met a girl there who was an ex-girlfriend of a friend of mine, walking down the street with her riding boots on in a very steamy Martinique in the Caribbean. And I stayed there for a couple of months, and then I came back to Ireland, and then was a bit restless in Ireland, and then I got a job in New York working for a family on 69th between 3rd and Lexington in one of these big apartment buildings. Very nice family, very nice man. He had a place in Broadway. But Liza Minnelli, Erica Young and Howard Cosell all lived in our building. So that was interesting. And I had another wonderful time in New York. They had a house in Fisher's Island, which we used to go to during the summer. And I brought some friends over because they needed extra help for all the parties and things. So I brought some friends over from Ireland, and we had an absolute ball. We worked really hard, but we were young and full of energy, and played hard as well. And then I came back, and then I thought, well, maybe it's time to behave myself for a bit, and I got a job in publishing. I worked at that doing production for a number of years, and at that stage then I'd met my husband, or husband-to-be, and a few years after that we had our first child, and that's when we got to Tinahely.
Okay. What struck you as different here compared to all of those places you had lived before? Or
I suppose from an observational point of view, I'm very much, wherever I lay my hat sort of a person, and I always said to myself, go out with everybody, they might have nice friends, because you have to just give people a chance to to like you or be with you, and you have to give them that chance as well. So I suppose it was right for us. So I made an effort, and the atmosphere and the friends that I made then, I still have today, obviously. So I think that is, I think it's about the people, first of all, that kind of, that exchange and the security that you have with them and the friendships that you make with them, and that's what gives the place its appeal, really. Obviously we live in a beautiful place. Beautiful rolling hills. People gasp when they come to Wicklow. They are astounded at how beautiful it is, and I don't take it for granted. Because I've seen other places as well, but there's lots of beautiful places. But this is the beautiful place for me, and it makes me serene and content, and it's safe and secure, and I feel invested in the community, and I feel that the community is invested in me as a result. And that is what makes somewhere home, I think, ultimately.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about that kind of sense of community, or how you kind of
Okay, well, how I found
right.
things when I first came here. When I first told a friend of mine in Dublin that I was moving to Tinnahealy, she said, "Oh my God," she said, "my mum has just moved there a year ago." And we had both had our children at the same time and had been at the same breastfeeding group. And she introduced me to her mum in the village, and she said, "I've already arranged it. You're going to the mother and toddler, there's like a baby group that meets once a week." And I went to that. In my first 3 days here, I went to that, and it was fantastic. The support that, if anybody moves into a community and they have a young child, they need to find a group like that, because the support that you get, there's more experienced mothers, there's people who are just bumbling along like yourself, haven't a clue what you're doing, and just trying to make the best of it. And the friends that I have from then, I still have. In fact, I even met one girl whose house we'd gone to see just outside Knockanana, and she was there with her child as well, and we became friends. She's since moved to Norfolk now, but it was fantastic for me, and that led on to various other women's things. So I remember in 2003 it was the Special Olympics. And Tinnahealy was hosting. I can't remember the name of the town that it was hosting, but there was people all over the world, had come to Ireland, and we organised like a sort of a fundraising thing for the Tinnahealy Women's Network, and that was my first sort of experience of getting involved in that sort of community thing, and it was lovely, and the women were fantastic, and the organisation was fantastic as well, because it was very mixed. It wasn't just people like me with young children, it was older people who had moved into the community, or older people who were in the community, people with different interests. And the way it was run at the time was that there was like a main committee, and then a pair or three people would take over an event once a month. And they could do it with whatever they were interested in. They could have somebody in to talk. They could, but there was always cake and tea and chats and sometimes a glass of wine. But it could be anything. It could be a creative thing. You could be taught how to make something. It could be a talk about something quite serious. Or it could be, just sitting around. Some people, that's all they wanted to do. And it provided such a rich environment, and it was different from the ICA, which was also running at the time. They sort of had I don't want to be derogatory about it, but sort of a competitive knitting sort of feel about it that wasn't right for everybody. And I mean, some of the women in the ICA many of the women in the ICA were also part of the Women's Network, and that was fantastic. And that I got involved in that, I suppose, first. And then eventually, as social media changed, I think a key factor as well was a lot of a women's choir was set up. And a lot of the women who were most attentive in going to that, went to the Tinnahealy, they didn't like going to the things at night. The network meetings were usually in the evening, and particularly in winter and stuff like that, they didn't like driving at night, or they didn't feel comfortable at night. So the choir became their social outlet, and then numbers dropped for the network. But this is the nature of community things. Some things die because social media changes, they feel more invested in other things, and eventually the sort of Tinnahealy network, women's network, sort of petered out, and it sort of has petered out over just a very short period of time. Actually, it's now been reintroduced, and somebody else has taken it over, which was wonderful. We did have sort of regular Christmas dinners, even though it wasn't running. Somebody would take over, and we'd have like a Christmas dinner in the courthouse or something. But as the choir is still running, it's the same people who are organising it. So that was one of my first experiences getting involved in community. Then I suppose other things happened. I was helping with the Tinnahealy community projects, and we were doing things like I was helping with the PR, and then what slowly happens is that you get to know more and more about the organisation, and you slowly get pulled in, and then your motivations become evident. And one of the things we did 10 years ago now was that we First of all, we delivered, we got a call from Wicklow County Council saying that the Department of Sport had some money and they wanted to create these multi-use games area, and Tinnahealy didn't have anything for teenagers at the time, and I knew that I would have a teenager at some stage, so they were they wanted to give us this money, but we had to spend it by a certain time, so it kind of really put the panic stations on. We did public consultations and stuff and asked people what they wanted, so a little skate area came up, a kickabout area, basketball hoops, some exercise things, and we tried to give as much as possible in that little space. Wicklow County Council, because of the crash, had a little bit of land beside the creche and the community hall, and they gave us a little pocket there, and it was convenient because it was parking. It was also close to the care centre, and the active retirement, so they could use the exercise items and stuff. So it was a winner for everybody that we could do it, but we had to have the public consultations, and it was hectic, but we got it over the line. And and it's still being used. People are there doing kickabouts and basketball, and the exercise things are still working. So it's definitely been useful. And then when that came about, and we thought to ourselves, well, we still need a playground. People have been talking about a playground for years and years and years, because we used to have to go to Archaeological or Gorey or wherever to go to a playground with your children. There wasn't one. And we thought, well, if they've given us the Mugger, wouldn't it be perfect to have a playground just leading on from that? And then again, the location is ideal. It's with walking distance in the town. And we contacted Wicklow County Council and would they be interested in it, and we got leader funding for it. And then I was co-chair on that committee to deliver the playground with another friend of mine who had also been friends with me from the Women's Network as well. And we went through all the hoops that are needed for leader, and we designed, we didn't design, we put out tenders for it and then tweaked them, and we came up with something that we thought was right for the space, because it was slightly tricky. It was on a hill, big, and we also knew that our kids, like little kids, get intimidated by big kids, and to create areas that are sort of slightly separated would be an advantage. And we also wanted to make it as natural as possible, because we did a lot of research about how more natural environments are better for children's development rather than cold, hard, bright plastic, and and the context of the playground, when you look around, it's views, it's hills all the way around it. So that had to be reflected in it. And we opened it on the 29th of September 2013 to great excitement. And 9 months after we'd gotten the Mugger thing sorted out. And I'll just never forget that day. It was so joyful. I mean, the kids were beside themselves. We had a lottery for the school for whoever was going to cut the ribbon, and it was just unbelievable, the excitement. We did have a little bit of trouble because some of the over the development of it, we wanted grass because we wanted to have a natural sort of feel about it, and also that it would create work. We didn't want to be putting money in on having artificial surfaces all the time, so we put rubber mats in and let the grass grow through it, and that looked fantastic. But you had to wait for the grass all to grow, and people were jumping over the fences. And I remember seeing a few lads in the Mugger area, and there was like sort of a dip in the fence. And I said to them, this, it's so important. I know you guys are here, and it's so important that we get this thing open on time, because everybody's so excited about it. If you see anybody jumping the fence, would you mind asking them not to, because it's really important that we get this thing. We can't open it unless the grass is at a certain level. And unbelievably, once we'd given that responsibility, it stopped, and they took it on as their own. And I think that is one of the things that has to happen with projects. People have to own them, and ultimately that's what all community work is about, that people feel ownership of it in their community. And I think the playground has been a fantastic success. I mean, the lady from Wicklow County Council, she says the best designed playground that she had seen, and it still works. as a design. So we're really happy with it, and it's hard to believe it's 10 years now nearly, and people forget that there was nothing there, that we used to have to drive. But that's also part of why you should do things, because people forget that there wasn't, other things like the recycling centre. That was down the back of Fitzgerald's premises. They had kitchen manufacturers, and they let us stay there for years. And I mean, it was the only community-run recycling centre in Ireland, and as to my knowledge, it still is entirely community-run. And then we got funding, and we got a dedicated site up behind the plastics factory that the Wicklow County Council had zoned industrial, so it was perfect for us. And we moved the whole recycling centre up there. We designed it all. I would say that there is fantastic people on the committee, engineers and businessmen and builders, people who know things that I obviously don't know. But, everybody's heard. I think the biggest thing was, just to identify exactly what we wanted to do there. It wasn't just about recycling. It had to be sustainable, and it had to be something that would offer more. And ultimately my thing was that it was going to be more an education centre as well for community. And that, I knew that schools took tours up there, but that we would offer more. So we got signage, grants for signage. So we explained to kids what happens to the material that they recycle, how many times it can be recycled, what they call it, how they do it. And that's all up there. Ultimately, I'm hoping that somebody will develop a little classroom there, which is what I think really should happen. It would be the icing on the cake for it, and it will happen eventually. It's I suppose it's just a bit too innovative at the moment, or funding isn't there in that area. But what happens in funding, it comes around in circles. Things suddenly that weren't relevant become relevant. That biodiversity, innovation, technology, QR codes. Who knew that QR codes would be used for tourism like they are being used? So you just have to wait, I suppose, until the time is right, and then grab it. So that's how things like that manifest. And then you apply for awards to get your profile built up, and when we won the REPAC education initiative as well, it was all very exciting. But we had also run a leader program for the River Bubbles, the Bubbles project, which Sarah Rubalcava, who you've interviewed, I know, designed, and it's a wonderful project, and it can be immediately picked up and put in any other community, because everybody has some kind of water basin around them. And it's important that kids understand that just because you turn a tap and water comes out, that's not the beginning and the end of that story, that everything has a before and an after related to it. So we were very proud to have been involved in that as well. And I suppose then there's the development of a tone for the website, that it wasn't going to be a commercial website, that it was about supporting the community and supporting the businesses that are in the community. And also then we had to use Facebook and stuff for, information and sharing. But the tone is really important there, because we cannot be seen to be favouring anybody over anybody else. And we're not. It is the responsibility, we can present the information, it is the responsibility of the business to invest whatever they want to invest in that space. And so far I think it's been very useful. I used to get a lot of emails for people wanting to book places, because people didn't realise that they could actually click on the booking thing. So Herman from Bavaria would like to book 3 nights B&B and somewhere on the Wicklow way, and I would have to email them back and say, well, can you specify which venue exactly you want, because you actually just threw to the website administration, and he would invariably tell me that, and thank you very much. So that was all part of that developing tourism. So it's a mixed mixed bag. It is hard though, because businesses are competitive, and competition doesn't build the best communities. So it's sometimes you've got to stop and have conversations, and actually the CUPHAT project, in my opinion, has been really demonstrated that collaboration is a far more successful route to follow than competition. And I think a lot of people who went on the trip and actually discovered we might be competitors in such and such a business, but actually, if we work together, we could actually keep people here for longer and make them see more and understand more about our experience than they already do. Because ultimately, when you go somewhere, that's what you want to have. You want to have the experience of being there and talking to the people that are there. And absolutely, without a doubt, the most important experience for any visitor are the people. Their experience with the people is what they really remember. I mean, you get annoyed about things, because you ordered white toast or you got brown or something like that. But those are trivial things compared to somebody's warmth and the effort that they put into talking with them. And it's so important, ultimately. But that's the business owners, and, their success depends on that, user experience, I suppose, is what they call it in the techie world, I think.
Just actually on tourism, are there where do you bring visitors yourself, or what do you kind of recommend to people when they come stay with
when they come and stay with us?
Area?
Well, I mean, the walks are fantastic, so I would definitely recommend the walks. And I suppose we have because we're people, we're remote, but we're actually close. We're close to Baltinglass, so there's all the history stuff there as well. And we have Rathgall Ringfort, which is stunning, absolutely stunning, and one I actually only discovered myself a few years ago. Place to be. It is actually a magical place. You can feel the history at every step there. And I mean, then there's shopping, and we have Gorey so close, we have Arklow so close, Baltinglass, Kilkenny is a short distance away. I mean, it really is a hub. Carla's a short distance away. There's canoeing in Baltinglass if you want to do something more active, or stand-up paddleboarding, and there's just so much. There's everything that you could possibly want in a holiday.
Have you a favourite place yourself that you like to go, or in the sort of uplands area?
I just really like being at home. I really like being at home, because we have the views there, and it's everything that I want in my day-to-day life. I'm in nature. We've there's pollinators. We have a very low impact lifestyle. So you can walk out in the fields, and there's foxes and stoat and badgers and all sorts of things. We have so many different types of birds here. I mean, 30 or something like that. My father got that little Cornell app, for the sound IDs. And he was sitting here one evening, and for literally in 20 seconds he had identified 12 birds in just that 20 seconds. And that is, for me, is a total joy. I'm mad about the birds, love the birds. And there's always so much to see, and we have many baby birds who are coming now to our feeder. We have male and female woodpecker and their juvenile. And I can actually lie in bed and I can watch them on the feeder, or sit outside in the patio or whatever and watch them from the feeder without them seeing me. And that is such a privilege that I can't actually explain it. It makes us so happy. And my children are completely nonplussed by our excitement, particularly the youngest. The older one is more excited about it, but the younger is he's grown up in this all the time. So of course, like most teens, he's unmoved by our excitement, as it should be.
Yeah, I mean, it probably gives you a very sort of particular perspective. You know, that's an unusual experience to have relative to most people.
To most people, exactly. Yeah, and it's such a privilege that it is so unique, because we've been talking about it with some of our neighbours who have cameras on one of the nests that's nearby, and they've never been that close to them in real life. And I mean, we could literally be sitting here, and I wouldn't say it's 15 feet, maybe, to the feeder, where you could actually see a woodpecker, a very, very shy bird, doing his thing. And then they run up into the elms and they peck away and look at us. And then we could be watching the tree creepers running up and down the trees as well, which you don't see. They look like little mice. They're pure white underneath. They're lovely little things. And so many other birds. So if birds are your thing, this is a wonderful place to be. And of course, Tomnafinogue Woods is another magical place, and it really is. Vestigial oak forest, there's magic there. You know, when things have been living there, it's like you can feel the history of the trees there, and it's all that mitochondria, all the stuff that's growing underneath. It's like being an avatar. I always think when you're in Tomnafinogue, you can nearly feel the vibrations of the trees talking to each other. It's an incredible place, and definitely worth visiting.
You mentioned, just to return briefly to Tinnahealy Community Projects there, and the website tinnahealy.ie. I know it's been it only occurred to me as you were saying it that maybe the clue is in the name, that you've had these kind of series of different whether it was the recycling or various other things, that it's kind of, or is it project based, or is it kind of sort of now wider than that?
I don't think it's just project based. I think, do you know what it is? It's motivation based.
Okay.
The people who are running it, whatever their motivation is. And I think that's what community development is. Because you can't be invested in something that you don't really, really want. And that it's, whether it's passion in your business or a passion for something that you really want in your community, that is the most important thing in getting anything across the line or getting involved in anything. You have to need it. Or you have to be so, or join together with other people who want it as well. And I mean, that's then you're unbeatable, really. Sometimes you have to plan and, get your head around things, but you learn things that you didn't know. I mean, there's, just even developing things. You find out how to write a letter, you find out what people want to know. Like when I was writing that letter for the footpath, I knew that I'd heard the engineer was a man's man. So I said, a man's man, he likes numbers, he likes proof, he likes sequences. So I said, there's so many families, they have so many children, this number of people will be going to this green school, which has just started getting these green flags, and there's more families coming on down the line. So it was a numbers thing that was providing value for money. And that's how I presented it. So you learn how to, I suppose it's about getting the best that you want, the best result that you want. But I mean, whether you're doing it in writing a letter to the county council, or whether you're doing it in putting together a leader application, it has to be authentic. And, you have to be passionate about it. That, I think, is the only thing that holds true. Whether you're in a tourism development, it has to be authentic and genuine. I remember I did some part-time work helping out in the Orchard Centre over the years. Just, as an extra body there to help guide people around. And one year they had a huge group over in batches of 250 from John Deere, American agents. And I think what happened to them, the conversations that I had with them, they were expecting a theme park. And without any exaggeration, they all said that it was the most authentic experience because the people who were there were being themselves, obviously being welcoming and polite or whatever, and managing these crowds of people. But they were being themselves. They weren't Disneyland, and that is where our wealth in a tourism context comes, because people really appreciate that and understand that. And I saw it obviously when we were in our Wales trip, that the people, was it Mark who had the horses?
Mark,
Mark in the Shire Horse Farm. I mean, the passion that man spoke about, and I mean, it wasn't the best time of year to be there. It was sort of rainy and a bit muddy, and obviously they weren't organised because they opened during the summer usually. But it totally infectious and makes you totally invested in what they are trying to do. You can see that they're working really hard, that they really believe in it. And so you believe in them too. And that is at the heart, I think, of any tourism experience. And definitely, can be replicated. And it doesn't have to be hard pushed. It can be more passive, but it has to be there. That has to be there.
What are the what kind of tourists would you like to see in this area, or what kind of tourism would you like to see?
I would like to see more people with cars coming. People travelling from Westmeath or Longford or something, coming with their cars, staying here, for a couple of days, just travelling around, experiencing Ireland, because my elderly father is staying with my sister and I, between us at the moment, and one of the things that he loves is getting in the car and going somewhere. So last week we were up in Glasson, and the week before that we went up to Carlingford Lough, and we'll probably go to Glengarth because we used to go there as children, and he's a sort of nostalgic review, and we can look back on things. But we get in the car and you find the B&B or whatever along the way. We like to say we travel hopefully. We could be a bit reckless. Once before we did a tour of Wexford, and we were down Dunmore East and Dungarvan, and we're down to Waterford, and we had nowhere to stay and all the places were booked. But luckily we met somebody who knew somebody else, and we ended up sleeping on the floor in their house. So, but we had great fun. So, travel hopefully, and if you have kids, I'd suggest being a little bit more organised. But I think that those are the kind of holidays, you don't have an agenda. Just go, get in the car, go and see what they have there, and go somewhere else if you don't like it. I think it's a great holiday experience.
How has the area changed since you arrived here?
Well, it's definitely looking better. Things are better. People are taking a little bit more care with their buildings. Unfortunately, a lot of businesses have lost in the village. That's been a major thing. We lost Madeline's restaurant. We lost Sims, which was a lovely, lovely little shop. We lost. There was another health food shop, which was lovely. We lost Seaver's pub, Black Tom's pub. That makes a big difference. So that's a sad thing.
What for you are the most interesting features of the local landscape?
I think the fact that it's actually nestled. I really get the sense that Tinnahealy is nestled in the hills. I suppose, it is an old garrison town. It had to, have access, with various roads going through it, which it obviously has in Shillelagh and Hackettstown and heading towards Archaeological and such. But I really think there's something particularly in the village itself, it's just nestling, it's enveloping, it's in its context. You see the hills, they're not far away. You know, they're not like in the distance where you see it actually does feel cozy around you or something, if you could imagine a hill being cozy. But that is my feeling about it, the way it's designed around. It's a hub. It does feel warm and welcoming, and I suppose that's why it's also been used a lot for films, because it offers so many different views into the village. And I suppose it must be a traditional Irish thing, I suppose, this square, this central area. And it would have been a marketplace at one stage as well, because even the building is called the Market Square. So it made a lot of sense that it would have all of these accesses and enjoy that, sense of bringing people together.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit about cultural heritage and natural heritage. Maybe before we kind of tease out sort of examples or kind of local elements. What's your kind of understanding of those
well terms? I think I suppose the thing is, what's interesting about Tinahely, I did say it was a garrison town, was that it always had sort of nearly, I don't want to say nearly equal numbers of Protestant and Catholics, which is a really interesting concept in a rural, town. And in a lot of rural towns, I suppose the Catholics would be in a majority, but here they are not. They would be, I wouldn't say they're closer to parity, but here they would be an active Protestant community, and they are very much involved with each other. There doesn't seem to be an enormous divide. There's no hostility that I've ever heard of, and I think it's been very productive for the community to have this blend of people. But then again, Tinahely also has always attracted people from overseas. I've often met people who have moved here, and especially nowadays is even more, the artists or creatives that have come into the area who are contributing to the sort of cultural heritage. For example, there's another Tina who runs an art class. She's a landscape gardener, but she also does an art class once a week in the courthouse. And she's originally from Canada. And she's obviously brought a lot to the community. She's been here for a long time. And there's other people. In fact, one of the founding operators of the courthouse was Sharon Bankhart, and she came from America as well, Minnesota, I think, or somewhere like that. And she set up was like a founding person in the courthouse, and started the arts center that as it is that we know now. And I mean, I've heard people saying, well, what's the best thing about living in Hackettstown? They said that we're close to Tinahely Courthouse. So, that the Courthouse Art Centre is so important for so many people in this area. And I mean, what it offers us as locals is unmeasurable, because I mean, it offers us access to fantastic performers. We literally only have to travel 5 minutes to go and see, Donal Lunny or, people like that. It's amazing performers, Mary Coughlin there. And then we have films, and we have amazing art exhibitions. In fact, there was an art exhibition from the art class there recently, and it was astounding, the quality of the work that was there. So, it has a very strong cultural heritage. And also the building was originally restored by FOSS, which was community employment. So some of the people who were there working on it are members of this community, so it's even more important to be part of that. So I think in the future things are looking even better for the courthouse. They've just received funding for important repairs. Inevitably that happen with very old buildings. They need to be restored and made better for insulation and sound and all sorts of reasons. So that it's going to be closing down for a little while, just while they do the refurbishment, and it will be missed, absolutely, because I mean, where does the choir go to sing, and stuff. So I'm sure the community hall will step into the breach, but it doesn't have the same atmosphere, I suppose, that the courthouse has.
What is it about Tinnahealy that kind of attracts that sort of artistic temperament, or people?
I think the fact that it is, I think ironic, it's a thing about people. I think because there's people of I don't want to go on about this Protestant Catholic thing. I don't think it's a thing, like it's not a thing when we're living here, but I think it's that thing of being open to other people, and I think that's what makes it appealing. People see opportunities here, even though, I mean, up until like 2 years ago, there was no bus link here. There was one bus a week on a Thursday, and you'd go up to Dublin on Thursday morning and you'd come back on Thursday evening, and that was it. Otherwise, we were totally cut off, since the train went in the 60s or whatever. And the local link has totally restored that, which has been wonderful for people who didn't drive, and for people to visit us, because when we first set up the website, there was well, how do I get from Arklow? You say, well, you have to phone a taxi, and we'd have to provide those information details on, and now they can actually just jump on a bus, and it's 4 times a day or whatever, and that has transformed things hugely, and I think more people will come as a result of that. So I think it's just a welcoming community. There seems to be an openness to people from the outside, and a lack of judgment. People are open. It's welcoming.
We got a taster of some of the many birds at your feeder in the garden there. What are the kind of most important birds or sort of plants or animals in the area? Who do you
well, I mean, one of the things I remember, 15 years ago, that there was no woodpeckers in Ireland, and the first woodpeckers in Ireland were heard. It was all secret, hush hush, because they didn't want every twitcher out here. But I believe it was in Tomnafinogue, and slowly but surely the woodpeckers, even though they are not a native bird, they came over from England, they have spread around Wicklow, and I know that my sister has them in Roundwood, and we have them here now in our garden. I think that would be the most notable sort of bird, because it's such an impressive bird, and it is so distinctive. It's very easy for people who aren't birdie to actually see them or hear them. You can go into Tomnafinogue, and if you're quiet and you listen, you can hear them rat-tat-tatting away. And also in Tomnafinogue as well is that you very likely come across deer. There's often deer walking around there, and they're such timid sort of creatures. I mean, obviously we see deer around here, but usually in the evening jumping around. But it is, it's a privilege to see animals in their own environment, and thriving in their own environment. As I said, we have foxes here, and badgers and stoats, and when we've moved here, I have never seen a rabbit in our field. We have 4.5 acres here. I've never seen a rabbit in it, and somebody told us it was because we had stoat. They are such ferocious predators, so tiny, but such ferocious predators that they, where they live, there aren't rabbits. I mean, our neighbours have rabbits, but we don't have rabbits for some reason. So obviously we are a stoat home. Okay. But you would see them so rarely, and they are amazing. We also have an otter, I believe, in our river. A friend of mine who is a journalist from London saw it when she was down there with my oldest boy many, many years ago. And she was a bit of a wag, so she called it Harry Otter. So Harry Otter he became from then on. But it is a privilege to have those things. Years ago we did a pure mile along our road, and some of the animals, we wrote about with some of the animals that were here. I think that Joe had counted 27 birds. I know that just down the road, and there's a bit of forestry there, that there's a long-eared owl. Joe has seen it a number of times, and he's, he knows his birdies. And there are they've recently put up, barn owl boxes as well. So hopefully there'll be more of that for us to see. Obviously there's lots of bats. always lots of bats. You see them whizzing around at night. When the kids were little, we had a water butt outside, and my oldest came in and he said, "There's a bird stuck in the water butt." And I went in and it was a bat. So we picked it up and dried it off and kept it warm, and then in the morning or the following day it just flew off. We put it outside in the evening and it was gone in the morning. So obviously it was absolutely fine. But to be able to see creatures like that, or we had a fox once that was injured. So we had Foxy kept in a box in the shed, and I only handled him with rubber gloves, so he wouldn't be imprinted or anything like that. And it turned out I had him at the same time as the green school visit. So I brought him, and everybody, I remember the green school people said, "Well, you were doing pretty well." He says, "But when you brought a recovering fox, it sealed the deal."
You actually brought the fox up.
I brought the fox up so they could see him. Seal the deal. Nobody was allowed to touch it, of course, or anything. So, it was sort of seeing it at a distance because, we didn't want to traumatize him. But unfortunately, he was quite sick, so he did actually pass away. But you can just imagine.
I was going to say, such a treat for
children to see it. Yeah. Having said that, I am a weird mother, and I remember there was a dead otter on the road once, and I pulled over it wasn't too mangled, and I pulled over to show my children because I said the opportunity for you to see a creature like this, living is nearly impossible. I said, so we can have a look at its feet here, we can have a look at the little face, and I think some people thought I was absolutely bonkers to do that. But, you're in the country, there's life and death. There's, when farmers have lambs, there's some lambs don't make it. And, I don't think it's any harm for kids to see that this is life and death and nature, and it's cruel sometimes, but there's a lot of joy in it as well. And lots of learning.
Yeah. We might change tack a little bit. I was keen to just ask you about archaeology. Do you have a favourite archaeological site in the area, or is there something that
immediately, I haven't actually been up to Kilranella, and I really want to do that walking tour. But I love Rathgall. I love it. I absolutely love it. I think it's an incredible place, and I think the restoration of it, or the maintenance of it as a monument, is just perfect. It's not overdone. It's not commercialized. It is still very embedded in the environment. I think that is really important for how they've presented it. It has a very, nice little car park. There's a very simple walk to it. You are not, bombarded with information plaques and too much shiny stuff all the way around it. Very discreet. It's about being in that space and seeing it, as they saw it. When you stand in the middle there and you can see all the way around you, you'll know why it was important. Even though you don't feel that you've been at that sort of elevation, you can see everywhere. It's an incredible place.
You mentioned the visit to Wales that you were part of as part of the CUPHAT tourism network. What connections are you aware of between, say, this locality and Wales, or the other side of the Irish Sea?
Well, I think it's. I think their experience is different from ours, because I think that they are actually much more remote than we are. I think people might find Tinahely by accident. It's not too far off the beaten track, whereas you really want to go to those places to experience them. You have to make a little bit of an effort to actually get there. But it's impressive because it feels like it's a bigger space than we feel here, and I think maybe it's to do with the amount of the population that we have here. It's far more agricultural. It doesn't have that wildness. But I suppose you're looking at Lug or whatever, that's in our experience here, but it still doesn't have that wildness that I think that Wales has. That was what my feeling was when we were going across, and things were quite sort of separated. So here we have a much more, I suppose, bucolic atmosphere feel around it, as opposed to the wildness that you have. And it's the same, I suppose, if you go to Connemara or whatever. There they have more of that wildness. It's more I suppose it's more closer to the ground here.
Yeah,
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's closer to the ground, the experience here.
Yeah. In terms of tourism here, we've talked a little bit about the tourist experience. What are the kind of big challenges facing
accommodation?
Tourism?
Would be the primary thing. Accommodation, without a doubt. We haven't any hostels. We need a hostel. Badly. I think it would transform the place, and ideally, something like Black Tom's could be turned into something like a hostel. But I understand the owner isn't. He's not able to do that. So I don't know, and I don't know if he'd ever want to sell or what the story would be. But I think a hostel would be number one on the list, because there's a lot of young people walking around. I saw a group of maybe 30 young, they looked like they were German, with a couple of young men with a couple of older people with them, and maybe like a scout group or whatever, I don't know. But I was thinking, where could they affordably stay in those numbers? And I have no idea where they stayed personally. I don't know if they were camping or whatever they were doing. But I think if we had, bunks and, hostel accommodation, we would get a lot more. And also, maybe more B&B opportunities, just even on the way in and out. I know that Airbnb is doing well around here. There's a couple of people, but they're limited by how much they can actually, how much time they can actually, rent out their places for. And, you don't want to have somebody there for 2 weeks. A couple of nights is lovely. But, it's wear and tear on your property as well if you have people for longer. So I'm not really sure whether Airbnb is the way to go, for that sort of thing. And obviously we have a lot of weddings and stuff here, so people do have, accommodation for a certain amount of time. But I think if we had a hostel would be a big thing, and maybe a few more B&Bs in the immediate locality. Maybe a couple of houses that might be interested in doing something like that. That would be ideal.
And the flip side then, what are the sort of big opportunities in terms of tourism, do you think, in the region?
Well, I think if we had accommodation, I think it would create itself. If you build it, they will come. The walking thing is huge, and people love the walking, and not everybody wants to be doing the whole Wicklow way. Maybe they just want to do a couple of routes, and we have a number of looped walks that can be done in a day. And then you come back to base, and then you get a different feel on each one, and a better understanding of it. But you can still come home to comfort and a shower or whatever that you need, and then have another one the next day, a different experience. I think that would be ideal. Even for 3 days or something. There'd be something for everybody then, or even using it as a base and then heading into having a little bit of the high life and gory or whatever people want to do, and a restaurant would be great. A restaurant would be super in the town, because you're only talking about 2 pub sort of food and or the cafe as well, but that's not always open, and in the evening it's not, so it's not perfect. So that accommodation, we'll bring it. I really think so. But people are afraid to, and taking on restaurants is a big sort of commitment in a little town like this. You've got to get it absolutely right, because it has to appeal to the locals as well as the visitors, and it's hard to get that balance right. It needs a confident hand.
From talking to people in the other kind of areas as part of this project, do you feel like upland communities kind of face similar challenges, or did you come across a lot of the same things
I
in
think
your
the
discussions?
same things. I think staff was a huge thing, and yeah, accommodation has been a recurring issue about getting people to stay on the ground for longer than just a day visit. And the other huge problem is that tourism, according to everybody that I've spoken to, that Bord Fáilte stops at Glendalough. There is no tours that take anything a bit further than that, and they want people to stay in Dublin. They want people to travel out just for a short day trip or whatever. I mean, they even do these day trips from Dublin to Galway for a day, so you can tick it off and say you've done that. But you can't experience, somewhere like Galway just sitting on a bus and for 5 minutes and then turning around and driving back to Dublin. And I feel that is something that's a real, it's a shame actually, because as I said before, the whole thing about travelling in Ireland is that it's an authentic experience. And it's not an authentic experience if you're on the bus for 6 or 7 hours a day.
What's the best thing about living in this area?
For me, having travelled a lot, I think one of the things I like most of all is that I feel really safe here. I feel really safe, and I feel because of, I suppose, with the community stuff, I feel that I've invested in it. I feel invested in that, and I'm very grateful. I've got some fantastic friends and neighbours here, so I'm very grateful to them. And when I'm coming home from work, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, oh, isn't that looking lovely? Oh, look at that today. Oh, there's a weird sky. Oh, there, I am constantly brought back to earth, into the physical world. And I suppose that is from, when you're sitting in your garden looking at nothing and seeing so much, you're looking at nothing but seeing so much. That is that meditation. It's that grounding. It does feel it's real, and I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky to live here. I could be in a and that's not to say that I haven't lived in housing estates or whatever, and they are fantastic places for kids and families to grow up. But we wanted more nature, and that's what we got. We wanted to be more engaged in our physical environment, and that is a privilege, absolutely, that not everybody has. That, I think, is the main reason why we're so happy here.
How has your kind of relationship with the place changed or evolved over your time here?
I don't want to think that I've been. I don't want to feel that I'm complacent about it. I don't want to think that. I think that I am still uplifted by what I find around me. And I think sometimes when you live in a place for a long time, I certainly hear it. I say it to people who've been born here, and I say, oh, did you see that? And they are, I don't want to say confused about my enthusiasm, but they are maybe not as, you do, when something's right on your doorstep all the time, and your parents live there, or your parents live there, in a way you don't see it as others see it. So that can be useful when you're doing stuff to present, your responses to it. So in many ways, I'm proud that I have contributed in some small way to hopefully making it a better place to live and work, which is and be. But it depends on other people as well. Other people are involved, and they will find their thing, and I'm happy to observe that in my
later time, where I'm less invested, I suppose. But societies must change. They must evolve. New people must come on board. New ideas must come forward. I mean, if it's not doing that, there's something seriously wrong. If somebody doesn't have any new ideas about stuff, in 5 years, then there's something seriously wrong. But I suppose the biggest thing is about getting people who are complacent, getting them on board and excited about something else. That is a challenge sometimes, and I think it's one that happens in every community, to be quite honest. People say, "Oh, I couldn't do that. I have no experience of that." And I said, "But actually, nobody has any experience in it. We're all just trying to find our way." And I think that getting people to, I suppose you have to jump in anyway, and do your best. And what's the worst thing that could happen? It didn't work out. And if it didn't work out, there's probably a reason why it didn't work out. So try something else. I think that courage is sometimes, needed for people. And sometimes you just need somebody who can, I suppose lead the way in that, somebody who people are going to trust to follow. And actually this, so what if it doesn't work out? If it doesn't work out, it's not meant to be. You have to be brave sometimes.
We talked a little bit about how you like the view, when you like the kind of being able to observe. Do you, or did you spend much time kind of walking in the mountains or kind of exploring that way?
No, not a huge no. I mean, I've just walking around here. I mean, walk the dogs and head off down some of the lanes, and all of a sudden you're by yourself. I mean, during lockdown, we could walk the 3K here and you wouldn't see anybody, or even a bit longer. Nobody would be out and about, and I quite enjoyed lockdown actually. I think a lot of people did in a way, because it really. Well, it was lovely for many families, because particularly, with kids who were backwards and forwards doing things and activities and stuff like that, you actually get that thing of just being with them, as opposed to just, a role as a driver or, feeding them or whatever. They became more, I suppose, involved in the day-to-day, and that was lovely actually. It was lovely. I think it was very tough for them. I feel really, really sorry for them. But in my stage of life, it was such a treat to be able to spend some time with my children like that. I mean, I think, like the 18, 19-year-olds and stuff, it was unbelievably tough, because, everything is about their peers. And that was taken away from them completely, and had to go and hang out with their parents, who know nothing. Really boring. But that is the way of things. Yeah.
I know some people would have mentioned that maybe during lockdown they kind of discovered things within their 3K or 5K that they didn't sort of know existed. But I get the sense you would have known the lie of the land locally.
Oh yeah, well I would have been. I would have walked, all the roads and know most of the lanes, and I would be able to. I mean, I know where to find mushrooms. I'm not telling you, but I would be able to. I would bring my book along with me, and I'd have a look and see, okay, what's this and what's that, and we'd have a little mushroom stash. I'd be picking sloes, or we'd be making blackberry vodka, or or jam or whatever, and obviously my husband is a beekeeper, so there's always honey around, and he's busy with that, and there's always paraphernalia regarding all of that around the place. So the natural world is it's part of our lives. It's the indoor, outdoor things, plants that you would see. I mean, when spring comes around, first thing that happens is the cleavers are out and the nettles are out. Everybody has to have tea 3 times in a week to set you up for the rest of the year. And I mean, we'd make nettle soup, and all those old wives' tales, they have their grounding in something. So it's always worthwhile doing a few things. And then there's other plants that I've read about that I see along the thing, and you try to learn all the wildflowers, the bird's foot trefoil, the vetch, the other plants that are growing around, and that is the sort of thing, oh, that's come out now. So you're constantly observing the changes in nature, so it's never boring, and it's just about being part of that observation. So that's interesting for me.
Can you say a little bit more actually about that, maybe some of that folklore or wives' tales or cures that's
well, I mean, the thing, cleavers, goosegrass or whatever people call it, that is supposed to have amazing cleansing effects on your lymphatic system, and was used as a spring tonic, and has been used, I believe, for hundreds of years. And I know in particular that the nettles, full of iron as well, and silica, which is good for your hair and nails, and a nettle rinse was supposed to be good for your hair. You put the nettle water and rinse it through your hair, and it makes sense with all the prickles on it. And obviously full of other vitamins. The iron would be the primary thing, but vitamin C would be the first spring greens that I suppose that the people would have had. And there's lots of other plants that are, the first leaves off the birch were eaten, or not the birch, the beech were eaten as well. They're beautiful soft leaves, and even the hawthorn leaves. You can actually make like a relish out of the berries as well, but the hawthorn leaves, one of the old names is bread and cheese. So I don't know if kids would have been eating them on their way to school, but there's all these other sort of names that were given to stuff. And I think that's fascinating, that all that information is out there. You just have to research it, and it's so easy to research these things nowadays. And there's even a little plant that I believe has carcinogenic or anti-cancer properties, silverleaf, that grows up along, and it's it's prolific. And we just wonder, there's so much in medicine that has obviously come from plants, and if it's a small thing about, taking tea 3 times a week because you just want to set yourself up, because that's what everybody has been doing for hundreds of years, then it's no harm to take it on.
What do you know about the rock and soil types in the area?
Well, there's granite here, obviously, so radon is a big thing. So I actually had my house tested again recently, and luckily we were fine, but it is a definite concern for many people. But I think in olden days, our houses were, I know that they put vents and things underneath things nowadays when they're building it, but these houses were built without foundation. This part of this house never had any foundations on it. It's literally concrete poured onto the ground. And radon is toxic stuff, it's really nasty. And I think in olden days, I suppose the doors were left open or drafty or whatever, and I think maybe some of those things are lost on us now that we live in little hermetically sealed environments. So I think there was a reason why we aired the place. But being, coming from Scandinavian thing, I have this thing that the bed, when you get out of bed, everything is thrown back. The duvets are possibly hung on the line, and the place is aired for, an hour at least, and then you make your bed before you leave. So everything is, fresh and stuff. So, that's just a part of the Scandinavian thing that you would be airing. Or in Germany as well, they even if it's absolutely freezing, you would have all the windows open for 5 minutes, completely change the air in the whole house, and close it again, and obviously then it'll heat up the place again fairly quickly. But it's a full exchange of air. So the radon thing is with the granite, obviously, and this building is made of granite, and lumps of granite everywhere, all over it. So I don't think I think that's primarily what we're dealing with here. We have acid water as well. Our water comes from the hill up the road. It's a natural gravity fed spring. Even when there's snow and ice, and we had that big snow in 2010, and there was like a foot of ice on the road. Nobody, no county council came up and scraped the road, and our neighbours scraped off what they could, but we still had water. It was extraordinary from this spring that came down there. I mean, I get it tested every so often, and it's always fine. So, I mean, my youngest has never even had fluoride water. I mean, he obviously brushes his teeth and stuff like that, but never had any chemically treated water at all. And it's very, very slightly acidic, is what I do know. But it's not even like 1 point over it. But then my neighbour's water is very high in manganese. And I know my sister's water in Roundwood is very high in manganese as well. And that is a whole other ball game. That destroys pipes and destroys filters, and it destroys washing machines and stuff. So I think that's really a tough one to have. Heating pipes and things get all clogged up. So I think we're very lucky. Now I know that there is a well at the bottom of our field, and Joe has excavated it. But we haven't had any, we haven't put any pump or anything onto it. It's not necessary when we have the water coming from the hill. But that was obviously, when these houses were built along here, they had all of this in place. The only time we've ever had water failure is sometimes if the cattle break the pipe. And that's happened maybe, 3 times over all the years, the 20 odd years we've been here. And other people are on the pipe, so they're invested in it as well. We get it sorted out straight away. But we're lucky.
Just tell me about the house and the space we're in.
Well, the house was built in 1877, and it was part of the Coulaton estate, which most of the houses around here, and it's a 2-story house. It would have been 2 up, 2 down. Obviously over the years it's been extended to sort of accommodate modern living, but this room that we're in would have been the original sort of kitchen, sort of living area, and you can see there's a very deep recess here, and this was all open. And my neighbours remember the Clares who lived here before, and they had a big turf fire, and they had the stove with the arm that swings out over it, and there was always a fire in here apparently, and they would sit here and have tea with the gentlemen who were always very welcoming. In fact, they were talking about them at the funeral of one of my neighbours recently. One of the ladies was saying that there was always a space at the end of their table for the 2 brothers, because they didn't have, they were bachelors, and at Christmas they would always come and eat with them. And I think that sort of, that neighbourliness, I suppose, continues here. That's we're very, very lucky with that. But it's incredible to think that, that old-fashioned fireplace is here. I mean, the house is quite sort of modernised now. And it also has things like this funny little holes, like for example at the top of the stairs, what used to be a window, I suppose, looking out onto the piggery, there is a very small flap, and I believe I've heard that it was a safe house originally, for against the black and tans or whatever, which the people still talk about, the memories of that, and things like the curfews with the dying cow, and how it got its name as a shebeen and all that kind of stuff. So it's nice to be part of that history, that this house is part of them funny little things, very wide stairs. And why would they be so wide, And underneath the stairs, sometimes I used to find like this powdery stuff, but I think it's from the granite has crumbled, the sides of the stones or whatever have sort of crumbled over the years, and every so often you dust it out or whatever. And there was like funny windows in funny places that they never closed up. But for me, it's about the character, the continuing the history of the house. And we opened upstairs, and when we were opening upstairs, we were changing from opening up a room, basically doubling it up. And when we opened it up, the beam is actually lower than the ceiling is. So the builder said, well, do you want me to, plaster that in? And I said, not at all. What I really like having it visible to say this was part of the original structure of the house. And what's interesting about this house as well is that rather than having such strong sort of joists, I suppose, overhead, the middle part of the house, when you go up the stairs, the left-hand wall is solid all the way up to the top of the roof. The granite actually meets at the apex. So we only have one attic on one side. We can't access the attic on the other side. So it is actually holding up the house. This central, it's like, I suppose, shaped like a gable. So I suppose it would be like 3 gables that are holding up the roof, which is interesting, I suppose, because that's not the way houses were built, I suppose, or certainly not nowadays. So those are interesting things about the house. The other thing that's interesting about the house is that outside the gate, outside on the road, just outside the house, is a benchmark. And these were the things when the British surveyed Ireland in the 1830s. When you find this thing, it's called people call it a crow's foot. It's 3 lines with 3 sort of lines pointing downwards and another line on top. And you can look on old OSI maps, and you can find your house where these benchmarks were, and you can see what elevation they counted that at. And I subsequently learned that ground zero for them is the tower in Poolbeg in Dublin. There was a plaque there saying that was where ground zero is where they started, and all of Ireland's levels were measured against that point. So it's amazing to think that here we are out in the middle of nowhere, really, but we're connected to Poolbeg through that and the other houses around the place. Because they're quite rare nowadays, those benchmarks. They've all disappeared or they've fallen down. And they're subtle to see. Only that if you look on the map, you can actually find them. Because they have them indicated on the map. Because we did that as part of the Pure Mile thing. So you learnt a lot of history about the actual houses around here. And as I said, this house was built in 1877. As part of that Coolatin estate. But it would have been quite somebody high up in the estate would have worked here. It wouldn't have been like a simple labourer's house because it was a 2-storey. But we're one of 3. So there's 3 houses that are actually identical along this stretch. And they're still there on the old maps, which is nice. And we all have the same sort of thing. We have the same central big stairs. We have very wide stairs. And the same, 2 up, 2 down, with various changes over the years, obviously, for modern living.
Okay. I'm conscious we've covered a lot of ground this morning, Tina. Is there anything that I didn't ask you about or that we didn't touch on that you wanted to say a little bit about?
I think maybe the only thing I would say is, for anybody who's thinking about being part of a community, is what you put in, you get back 10 times. In my experience, it's you will learn things about yourself. You will learn things about your area. You will learn things about other people that will always be more than what you put in, and to be open to that experience, because nobody's judging, or it's not a competition. It's not about glory. It's about people making something better for themselves with other people. And ultimately, I think whether you're involved in community work or not, you're involved in a community, whatever that community is. Whether it's it's to do with your work community, or whether it's to do with your sexual community or your family community, all of those things, whatever you put in, you get in 10 times out. That would be my final thing.
That's a lovely note on which to finish. Tina, thanks a million.